Now we are ready to look at a neuron and its parts and see the beginnings of the functions of how a neuron works. So in this picture is a neuron, and a neuron is a single cell of the nervous system. And this cell conducts electric signals. Now think back to chapter 2 for a few minutes. Remember when you mixed salt and water and you had the buzzer and you were putting the probes in to see if it would conduct electricity and make the buzzer loud? You use ions to conduct electricity. That's what your neuron is doing also. And do you remember from chapter 12 or chapter 2 where you get ions from? They're from electrolytes, which are in your food. So food and drink have electrolytes. Those electrolytes mix with the water in your body. They dissolve and dissociate and produce ions. Ions then conduct electricity. Go back to your chapter 2 lab for a review of all that. So the neuron conducts electric signal by moving ions in and out of the neuron. And this signal is one way. So it enters through this part of the neuron. It moves through like this. And then you get down here, and that's where you then transmit the signal to something else. Over on the right, it's color-coded by region. So we have the blue, the pink, the green, and the purple. Show us the different segments of a neuron. So we're going to go through and look at each of those. The top one here is the receptive segment. So it receives the signal from another neuron. And that signal is in the form of neurotransmitter. And there are two parts of a neuron that are in the receptive segment. The dendrites, which are kind of all these things up here, all these branches are dendrites. And then this whole big round part is the cell body. And the cell body can also be called soma. The next part of the neuron is the initial segment. It initiates a signal, which is called an action potential. And this is kind of this triangle area right here called the hillock. Okay, think about when you hear gossip. Somebody tells you a rumor, so you receive that information. So your ears are like the receptive segment. Then you have to decide if you want to repeat that rumor to someone else and spread the gossip. That's what the hillock does. So signals are coming in to the dendrites and the cell body, and the hillock has to decide if it's going to repeat that signal through this neuron and send it on to the next neuron. The green area here represents the conductive segment. If the hillock does decide that it's going to repeat that information and send it on, the conductive segment is what conducts the action potential. And the conductive segment can be very long. You have the longest one would be in your sciatic nerve that goes from your lower back through your hips, down your leg, all the way to your foot. So the long part of a neuron is its axon. So all of this from here down to here is all axon. Then when you get to the bottom and it branches out, these branches are telodendria. Then the last part here in the purple is our transmissive segment. It transmits the signal to either another neuron or the effector. And it does so by secreting neurotransmitter. And it has these little bulbs here. These are synaptic bulbs. They can also be called synaptic knobs, or sometimes they're even called axon knobs. Those are the parts that secrete neurotransmitter. Okay, so those are the parts of the neuron. But remember we said that a neuron moves ions in and out. So now think back to chapter 4. What moves ions in and out of a cell? Do you remember learning about transport proteins? And we had channels, gates, and pumps. So now we're going to have all these transport proteins that we're going to label. And they're color-coded based on what goes through them. So first we're going to look at the ones up here in the receptive segment. These are ligand regulated. And remember, a channel is open all the time. A gate can open or close. See this little flap right there? That tells you it's a gate because it has a little flap that can close. So these are ligand-regulated gates. Ligand means that they open when something binds to them. This little green triangle here, that is the neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters and hormones are ligands. So ligand-regulated gates open when a neurotransmitter binds to them. And we have 3 different ligand-regulated gates here. The pink represents sodium. And when it opens, sodium moves in. The blue represents potassium, and it lets potassium out. The green is chloride, and it lets chloride in. Then if we move down here to the initial and conductive segments, you have the exact same gates in both of these segments, so we'll just talk about them together. So notice there's that little flap telling you it's a gate, but you don't see a place here for neurotransmitter to bind. So these are not ligand gates. These are voltage-regulated gates. So they open when the voltage of the neuron increases. Okay, so neurons, they run on electricity, so they have voltage. Think of like a 9-volt battery, right? So there's voltage in the neurons, and that voltage can go up or down. When the voltage goes up, that's what makes these gates open. And we're going to follow the same color coding. So with the pink ones, these are sodium, and when they open, sodium comes in. The blue ones are potassium, and when they open, potassium goes out. Okay. Over here to the left, we have 3 more transport proteins. Look at the color coding scheme of the whole neuron here. On the left, it's yellow, right? From here all the way down to here. So what that's representing is that these 3 gates are found throughout the neuron. So the gates that are on the right in the specific sections are only found in that section of the neuron. The ones on the left are found throughout the entire neuron. So these 3 are in the entire neuron. Whereas, for example, the ligand-regulated gates are found only in the receptive segment and nowhere else in the neuron. The first one here is a sodium-potassium pump. If you look back at your Chapter 4 notes, when we were learning about active transport, I mentioned this as an example, the sodium-potassium pump in neurons. Now remember, pumps use ATP, and they are going to force molecules to go where they don't want to go. So they're going to go against the concentration gradient. They're going to concentrate the ions. So this pump moves both sodium and potassium. It pumps sodium out, and it pumps potassium in. The other 2 are leak channels. So notice there's no flap there. They don't close. So these are channels. And you have the pink one is sodium, and the blue one is potassium. So a channel is always open, but notice it says leak channel. So they let small amounts of sodium and potassium leak through. And they leak through according to their electrochemical gradient. Then if we go down to the transmissive segment, here is where you move calcium in and out. This one is a calcium gate, and when it opens, it lets calcium in. And this one is a calcium pump, and it pumps calcium back out. And this gate is voltage regulated. So notice the pump moves calcium the opposite direction of the gate. If we look back up here, the same thing. Our gates over on the right let sodium in, our pump pumps the sodium out. And our gates let potassium out, the pump pumps sodium in. So the pumps do the opposite of the gates. Okay, so this is your introduction to a neuron. It's the parts of the neuron and the transport proteins that are moving your ions in and out. In the next section, we're going to see how this works to actually make that electric signal.